or even cynical to God that I had this chance and now again I'm put in this prison. But he passed this test as well. And on the other side of the prison doors, there was an opportunity to influence for the glory of God that he took advantage of. And so when the prison doors finally swung open, he was ready to fill the role that God had prepared for him. He didn't have to waste time. He didn't have to get his mind right for it. He didn't have to have a moment to reflect. He was ready. So again, this is a lot of reading in here, but to make a long story short, the cupbearer after 2 years was like, oh yeah, there was this Hebrew in prison. I remember now. Let's pick up in Genesis 41. And I'll give you a second to turn there if you'd like. Genesis 41, verses 9 and 14 through 16. And what's going on is after 2 years, Pharaoh's now having dreams and needs it interpreted. And in verse 9, it says, then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, today I am reminded of my shortcomings. And so in verse 14, so Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And check this out in verse 16. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. It's that take that Satan moment, right? When Satan, even if he was trying to fill lies and corrupt his thinking, and this is so awful for me, and woe is me, and going back to being thrown into the cistern, and being sold, and his own brothers and his own family basically disowning him, going up and being wrongfully accused, having an opportunity to probably get out of prison, but it didn't work out. And we see that he said, I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. So did he have time to think about that reply? Not a lot. I don't know how long it took to shave and change clothes. This is pretty immediate. Right after the prison doors were open, he said, I cannot do it, but God can. And Joseph's influence, that influence of humility and modesty and giving the glory to where it deserves, it's humbling. And think about that. The influence that Joseph did in that time is still being felt today. It's being felt this minute in this class. And it's amazing to think that he was faithful enough and had the right mindset. He was investing and stewarding his life for God, that he was able to say, God will give Pharaoh the answer. I can't do it. It's amazing. And then quickly looking at the last test, and this is the test of prosperity. And think about what we have. Think about this divine woven story thus far. So I also want you to think of this. Had Joseph been released 2 years earlier, and the cupbearer would have said, oh yeah, there's this guy, do you think Joseph, where would he have went? He might have been not in prison anymore, but probably right back to being a slave again, right? But God used that time, and he used that time of trials and suffering in Joseph's life. And God was able to set the stage for the influence that he had planned for Joseph. And we see that he continues to be blessed by God because of his faithfulness. So, sorry about that. Okay. We see in Genesis 41, 38 through 40. So Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be put in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So even Pharaoh is recognizing the presence of God, and Joseph continues to positively influence those around him. And so through Joseph's life, God promoted Joseph in Egypt, and we need to realize that God did this. It was the faithfulness that Joseph had that God did this. Psalm 75, 6 through 7 says this, "No one from the east or the west or from the desert can exalt themselves. It is God who judges. He brings one down and he exalts another." And perhaps the greatest influence we see from Joseph is that he shared his prosperity. He remained close to God. And have you noticed, and I will raise my hand and be the first one to be guilty of this sometimes, do we pray to God through persecution when we're being persecuted and treated unfairly? And do we pray to God when we have problems in our life? But when we're prospering and things are going well, are we in the Word as much? Are we praying to God as much? It's human nature, right, to probably think when things are dire, we are turning to friends and we are turning to God. But Joseph, he was always faithful to God, and he remained in God. And so let's not forget that even though we're prospering, we still need to recognize that life itself is a gift from God. So he used his influence, and if you know the story, again, we just don't have time to read it all, but his influence, he used it, and they stored provisions for the famine that God had revealed would come. And after 7 years later, Joseph's brothers, they made their way to Egypt to purchase food. And just like his dream, just like God had promised, just like Joseph, without a doubt, knew would happen, guess what happened? His brothers bowed down before him. His brothers bowed down. And what could Joseph have done here? Malice, envy, ridicule. He could have taken revenge. He could have evened the score with them. After 20 years, we can forgive and not forget sometimes, right? So I'm sure he hadn't forgotten. But it was his test of prosperity, and once again, Joseph passed with flying colors. Read this incredible passage again through the lens of influence about Joseph. Genesis 45:5 says, talking to his brothers, "And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." Isn't that amazing? Would you have the power to do that? I grew up with 4 other brothers. I got mad at them sometimes. Sometimes I sought revenge, right? Sometimes I was jealous or envious, and somehow brothers do that to each other. But look what he said. Do not be distressed. Don't be angry. Don't be bitter. Don't be any of those things. I'm not. In my heart, I want you to be released of that as well. So as we kind of wrap this up this morning, just some concluding statements that I think are important. And they all have to do with faith. Through Joseph's faithful success, we learn how we too can pass the test that would destroy our influence. And again, all of us have a great positive influence that we can share with others, and our spheres and our circles are even wider than we know. When we talked about family, we talked about children, and we said the camera's always on, right? Well, same way with us. Camera's always on. We need to make sure that we're continuing to lead the Christian life and be an example and be the salt and be the light to others and let our light shine. We also look at the influence for God, right? Influence for God, and it's won by faithfulness. In every area of our stewardship, God simply requires faithfulness. And the last point this morning, in whatever position or place you find yourself in, and as you know, life can take twists and turns, and you may be this worker over here and a supervisor next and a co-worker here. Your family situations may change. So whatever position you're in, whatever you find your place in from this day moving forward, always faithfully use your influence for the glory of God. So with that, I think time's up. I did want to read one real quick piece also about positive influence. Turn, if you would, to Matthew 5. Matthew 5:13 through 16. I just love these words. Again, through the lens of influence, listen to what Jesus says. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. So I invite you this week to know how much influence you have, recognize those spheres, and be a positive influence to others. Next week, we're going to be talking about stewarding our testimony. Again, a lot of people think of testimony as my testimony and when we were saved. We're going to talk about a much broader part of testimony and how we're making sure we're investing in the testimony that we live our lives. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.